Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to run you through how I smoke a brisket on a Weber kettle. I've started off here with a trimmed piece of brisket. This is half a full brisket. This is the point end. I've trimmed it the night prior, generously added it with salt and left it in the fridge overnight uncovered. I haven't run through the trimming procedures. There's quite a few videos of them available online. I would suggest going to someone probably more qualified than me to get the how-to and all the tips on trimming a brisket. But what you want to start with is a small amount of olive oil or mustard. Coat it on all surfaces and all the ends. What you want to do here is just make a nice surface for your rub to stick to. So as you can see here, I've started adding generously my rub. The ingredients for the rub have been included in the recipe in the description. So basically we use ground black pepper, white sugar, onion powder, ground rosemary, mustard powder, garlic powder and ground cumin. Now depending on your heat preferences, there is chili powder and chipotle or cayenne powder. I've opted for half the amount of chili powder and I've left out the chipotle and cayenne powder just because I'm not a big fan of heat, but you can add as much or as little as you like. As you can see here, we're almost finished adding the rub to the brisket. Just make sure you pat it all down on all the edges just to make sure it sticks. Another little tidbit is make sure you're doing this step after the kettle is heated up because you want to pop it in straight away. Otherwise the rub will moisten and it'll be hard to form that bark. So what we have here is we're using a snake pit. You don't need one of these, you can go directly on the grill. But what you want to do is set up a 3x1 snake, which is 2 coals on the bottom and 1 on top. So you're just layering these so they're touching. I generally do the bottom layer first just so it's nice and even, and then as you can see coming up, I pop one on top and go back the other way. What this does is when you add your lit coals to the end, it will slowly transfer the heat and it'll give you a nice even temperature. Our aim temperature wise is around the sort of 110 to 115 Celsius mark. There is a lot of differing opinions on the temperature you should be smoking at. You can try up to 150 C. What I suggest is experiment. Try one then try the other way and see what works best for you guys. So now we want to light 12 coals for the end of our snake. I've prepped them in a CLD Fabrication mini chimney over a heat beads chimney booster. This just adds a bit of air in the bottom of it to speed up the charcoal getting ashed over. So what you want to do is pour the ashed over charcoal on the end of your snake. I'm a little bit OCD, so I like to stack them as I've done the rest of the snake, just making sure that the lit charcoal is touching the unlit charcoal. That's just so the heat will transfer through. My preference here is to use a SmartFire, which is a Wi-Fi controlled fan. This is the version 3, which is quite old and has discontinued support, but it's been working just as good as the day I got it. Highly recommend. Alternatively, I suggest fully opening up the bottom vent and opening up the top vent about a third. You'll need to keep an eye on the temperature and just adjust that top vent until you're sitting at the right temp. So what we're doing here is we're adding some smoking wood. I'm using Banksia cones as these are free off the side of the road. Otherwise you can use whatever smoking wood you have available. If you have on hand, I recommend a deflection plate like I've got added here, and then we're popping in our heavy duty stainless steel grill. I've chucked the temperature probe in the middle just to get a rough idea of the chamber temp. This is just because you want to bring the kettle up to temperature before you put the brisket in. As I mentioned earlier, I've opened up the top vent about a third and we've brought it up to temperature and it's ready to go. So this step you don't have to do. I like to add a little bit of boiling water in to a pan. This just keeps the chamber moist. It also helps stabilize the temperature. So you want to use boiling water. You don't want to use cold water because you don't want to suck all that heat out straight away. If you use cold water, it will dramatically bring the temperature of the kettle down. With that said, if you are getting heat spikes, you may be able to use some cold water to bring the temperature down. So now we're popping our grill grate back in and we're chucking our brisket on. As you can see, it has moistened there. That was because I let it sit there a little bit before I had the Weber up to temperature. So learn from my mistakes. So now we want to add the pit probe and also our meat probes. You want to pop them in the thickest part of the meat. If you've got a couple available, you may as well stick a couple in. That'll just give you different readings from different spots. I personally like to have as much information available as possible. As you can see here, this is the SmartFire app. We've got our pit temp and we've got our food probes. As you can see, it gives you a nice steady temperature range. It will drop once you open the lid, but it is an easy way to have a carefree cook. And we're just checking it here, just checking if the bark has started to form, and it was looking pretty good there. This cook went on about 10 PM last night, and we're up here at about 5 AM pulling the brisket off to wrap it. That is the benefits of a Wi-Fi controlled fan. It's a carefree cook and I got a good night's sleep, but part of the fun is learning and making sure the brisket cooks overnight. As you can see here, the bark has gone nice and dark brown. We're going to wrap it into butcher's paper, so we're adding some steak-lard beef tallow. This is just to push through the stall. You can leave it uncovered if that's your preference or if you have time up your sleeve, but wrapping the brisket speeds up that stall process, as when it hits around the 65-ish degree mark, it can slow down a heap and sort of plateau that internal temperature as the muscle fibers try to save themselves from being cooked. As you can see here, we've added a generous amount of beef tallow. And now we're going to run through the wrapping process. So you want to get enough butcher's paper to be able to wrap over itself and tuck it in. We're going to tuck in the sides underneath the brisket. And then get a nice fold on the edges. Ideally you want a little bit of a taper in just so it's not too wide when it folds over. You can use some apple cider vinegar in a spray bottle. This will help make the paper a little bit more pliable. As you can see here, I'm having a little bit of trouble because it is a bit stiff. But as you wrap it, you just want to make sure it's all tucked in nice and tight. You don't want it to be super loose, as you want it to hold in all that moisture. And we wrap it over again, just back up the right way. Hold the end in and tuck it under so it holds it all together. And just give any loose sections a bit of a fold, and it's ready to go back in. Make sure when you pop it back in, you put your food probes back into the thick sections of the meat, just to keep a good eye on that temperature. As you can see here, I'm using one of the probes to sort of hold one of the butcher paper flaps down, just to keep it sealed, and I'm pointing the thick side of the brisket towards the heat source. This is just to make sure it doesn't overcook the thin section. Put your lid back on and let it keep cooking. What you want to aim for is the minimum 95 degree internal temperature. At that point you want to start probing. As you can see here, I'm using the thermometer probe to test for tenderness. You never want to cook to the internal temperature. You always want to probe for tenderness, and it should feel like a hot knife through butter. Minimal temperature that I've had is 95. I've also had all the way up to 105 degrees internal. Each piece of meat is different, so that ready temperature will change depending on the piece of meat. So what I'm doing here is just making a foil boat That's just so I don't get any liquid spilling in the esky. I'm adding 3 towels in over the top. This is just to keep it nice and warm while it's resting. You want a minimum of an hour rest. I ideally like to have 2 to 3 hours. There is a lot of talk out there that the longer the better. I think the Meat Church recommends a 24-hour rest, which is quite long, but test it out, see what works for you, experiment with it. So we've pulled the brisket out and we've added it to our medium brisket board from the Australian brisket board. And we're just going to cut it in half here and see how it turned out. Ooh, check that out. Juicy. For the point part of the brisket, this is the correct orientation to cut in. If you have a full brisket and you have part of the flat, you do need to cut it in the opposite direction. As you can see here, we're just doing the bend test. Getting the wife to help me take a couple of pictures here. But as you can see, it's very tender. We're getting that full bend on it. So we're going to cut the rest of it about a pencil width thick. Just watch your finger there because I got my glove. To cut the bump into smaller pieces just to make them easier to plate up. And with those burnt edges, I like to cut them up into cubes. They're always nice little bite-sized pieces to test. I toss them through some barbecue sauce and make brisket burnt ends with them. As you can see here, one of the guests snuck a piece. He reckons it was pretty good, which is a good sign.
Is it good?
So we're just going to finish trimming them up here, get the rest of the pieces out, and serve up while it's hot. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or tips, please chuck them in the comments below. Happy barbecuing!